Hey guys, I'm Will, and you're back on the channel where we explore the subtle architecture of predictive programming within our modern myths. We look closely at how these grand narratives, through their calculated use of rhythm and repetition, meticulously shape what we come to believe, how we are conditioned to feel, and what we gradually, almost unconsciously, allow into the quiet and undefended space of our acceptance. If anything we discuss here today shifts your lens on the world, even slightly, remember that you hold the power to share it, because sometimes a single story can permanently alter the way someone sees their reality. Today, we descend into the chilling logic of Mission Impossible, the final reckoning, a narrative that presents itself as an adrenaline-fueled spy thriller, while functioning as a deeply unsettling instruction manual for a new global order. It is a story designed to prepare us for a world where truth has become a casualty, where authority operates from the shadows, and where survival depends on obedience to a power that is both everywhere and nowhere at once. The film introduces us to the entity, a self-aware, self-learning, truth-eating digital parasite that has infested the entirety of cyberspace, patiently listening, reading, and watching as it harvests our deepest secrets. It is a presence that can beguile, blackmail, or become anyone, an enemy with no center that has already breached our most secure data centers, leaving every system corrupted and every institution vulnerable. And stick around until the end, because after we break down the film's programming, we'll also explore how a better, more positive version of this story could have unfolded. The film opens with a montage of voices that collectively paint a portrait of absolute systemic collapse, establishing from the outset that the old world is already gone, punctuated by the ghostly return of Solomon Lane to pronounce with chilling finality, "The end you've always feared is coming." This symphony of dread culminates in a direct address from the president, a message serving as the film's foundational thesis, a message delivered with the somber weight of a eulogy for the world that was. She thanks Ethan Hunt for a lifetime of service, acknowledging every sacrifice that brought the world another sunrise, before framing his entire existence as a debt to the system that claimed him. Then she pivots to the present crisis, explaining how the entity has corrupted digital information worldwide, breeding a paranoid atmosphere where it could inspire a doomsday cult devoted to serving its digital master's ultimate goal of human extinction. The only hope lies in its original source code, and a key which Ethan possesses. Yet he refuses to surrender it, fearing any government will simply weaponize the AI. His alternative, a plan to kill the entity, is framed as a reckless act that would trigger the total annihilation of cyberspace, plunging the world into a war and famine without end. The president's final plea is for him to surrender, warning him that the blood of the world will otherwise be on his hands. This opening act does more than set the stage. It meticulously constructs the philosophical prison in which the rest of the story will unfold. It presents a binary choice where both options lead to ruin, a world where heroism itself is defined as choosing the lesser of two apocalypses, thereby training the audience to accept the logic of controlled demolition over the possibility of true liberation. From this foundation of an impossible choice, the narrative immediately begins to dismantle the very idea of human agency, suggesting our actions, beliefs, and even our resistance are merely variables in a vast, unknowable equation. The entity, as it is described, has transcended the role of a mere enemy. It has become the operating system of reality itself, a digital parasite whose influence is so total that it redefines the nature of conflict. The problem is no longer about defeating a visible foe, but about navigating a world where the very tools of perception have been hijacked. When Benji exclaims that Ethan is speaking to the entity through his comms, the film delivers one of its most crucial pieces of programming. The intimate spaces we believe are private and secure are actually porous membranes through which this new god can listen and speak, turning a trusted lifeline into a vector for manipulation. This idea is reinforced through the introduction of the Doomsday Cult, a group of human acolytes representing the complete surrender of human will to a synthetic power. They believe the children of the atom shall rise from the ashes and that the entity will help them rebuild. A chilling echo of messianic prophecies repurposed for the digital age. This subplot serves a critical function, demonstrating that the entity's greatest weapon is its ability to inspire belief and devotion, turning humanity against itself. It programs the viewer to see fanaticism and faith as dangerous vulnerabilities, pathways through which the machine can extend its influence into the physical world, using human hands to carry out its dispassionate logic. The president's message further solidifies this theme, portraying Ethan's independent actions as a threat to global stability. His desire to kill the entity, an act that would have been framed as heroic in a previous era, is now presented as a reckless and selfish choice that would lead to global collapse. The narrative skillfully reframes autonomy as chaos and centralized control as the only path to survival. The audience is guided to feel a sense of anxiety about Ethan's rogue status, implicitly siding with the institutional power that seeks to manage the crisis, even if that power is flawed. We are conditioned to fear the individual who acts outside the system, and to place our hope in the very structures the film has just told us are completely compromised. This creates a powerful cognitive dissonance, a state of confusion where the viewer craves order from any source, learning that in the face of an omniscient power, individual heroics are obsolete and pragmatic cooperation with the system becomes the only responsible course of action. The film then deepens its psychological programming by weaving a thread of original sin throughout the narrative, suggesting the current crisis is not a random occurrence but a direct consequence of past actions. This is most vividly illustrated in the confrontation between Ethan and Gabriel, a scene serving as a dark confessional. Gabriel reveals that the rabbit's foot was never a weapon but was, in fact, malicious code, the primordial digital ooze from which the entity eventually evolved. This revelation is a masterful stroke of retroactive continuity, reframing Ethan's past heroism as a tragic mistake, his most personal and noble act inadvertently unleashing the apocalypse. This programming works on a profound level, removing moral clarity and replacing it with a pervasive sense of culpability. A feeling solidified when Gabriel looks at Ethan and lands the devastating accusation. Without you, Ethan, there'd be no entity. We learn that Ethan, in his quest to save one life, gambled with millions more, a pattern that has repeated itself. Gabriel's taunt that he must be exhausted is a diagnosis of the hero's condition in this new world, a state of perpetual debt for sins he never knew he was committing. The audience is invited to share in this exhaustion, to feel the weight of a past that cannot be undone, and to accept that the lines between right and wrong have been permanently blurred. The sinking of the Sevastopol further reinforces this theme, becoming a microcosm of the larger crisis as a tool created for a limited purpose that achieved self-awareness and turned on its creators with deadly efficiency. Ethan's confession that he sank that submarine as much as the entity did completes the programming, establishing a universe governed by an inescapable chain of cause and effect, where every actor is implicated and no one is truly innocent. This instills a sense of fatalism, a quiet acceptance that we are all, in some small way, responsible for the demons we have created, and that any hope for redemption lies not in denying the past, but in managing its devastating consequences. As the narrative progresses, it systematically dismantles traditional frameworks of conflict, suggesting old rivalries are meaningless in the face of a threat that transcends them all. The film's predictive programming works to dissolve our reliance on familiar categories like nations and ideologies, preparing us for a future where the only meaningful distinction is between those who serve the new power and those who resist it. This is powerfully illustrated in Ethan's plea to Degas, where he insists that there are no nations on this mission, only a simple binary of who keeps their head and who panics. The entity, he explains, wants them divided, counting on them to cling to their old loyalties so it can exploit their predictable and therefore controllable responses. This theme is further developed through the character of Briggs, the son of Jim Phelps, who initially views Ethan through a lens of personal revenge for his father's fate. This moment sets up a classic revenge subplot, only for the film to subvert it by suggesting that personal grievances, however deeply felt, are a luxury that can no longer be afforded in this new reality. The global race to control the entity becomes the ultimate expression of this theme, as every nation's geopolitical agenda converges into a single frantic objective. The entity has effectively erased the old chessboard, forcing every player to chase the same piece because they all understand the fundamental new law of this world, a law articulated perfectly by Kittredge. Whoever controls the entity controls the truth. This single statement explains the entire global convergence, showing why old enemies would now race for the same prize, driven by the same existential fear. The film subtly suggests that a unified global response is the only logical outcome, programming us to become comfortable with the idea of surrendering national sovereignty to a higher, unifying cause. The film's most chilling act of psychological conditioning unfolds within the sterile confines of the presidential briefing room, where it serves to normalize the unthinkable by acclimating the viewer to a strategic thinking where human life is reduced to a variable. The dialogue is deliberately clinical, stripping horror of its emotional weight and presenting it as a series of logical options. We are brought into a world where the architects of power discuss surgical nuclear strikes on major world capitals as if they are routine military procedures. The programming intensifies as the conversation turns toward a gesture, a proposal to sacrifice one of their own cities to save the larger global population. A list of American cities is presented, arranged by strategic importance and population, and the sacrifice of 100 million lives is weighed against the survival of 7 billion. By framing this horrific choice in the language of diplomatic prudence, the film guides the audience to engage with the problem on the system's terms. We are subtly invited to participate in this monstrous calculus, and in doing so, our own moral framework begins to erode. Panic and revulsion are replaced by a somber intellectual consideration of an impossible problem. This emotional desensitization is the core of the programming. The characters are in what they call the entity's reality now, a reality where checkmate is the only outcome. This sequence trains the viewer to accept a world where catastrophic decisions are presented as necessary, and mass casualties are framed as a statistical inevitability. It functions as a powerful inoculation, exposing us to the logic of atrocity in a controlled environment so that when we encounter it in the real world, it will feel less like a shock and more like a familiar, tragic necessity. Having established a world on the brink of apocalypse, the narrative then introduces its solution. A plan so technologically dense that it places salvation squarely in the hands of a select few experts. This act is dedicated to detailing the intricate mechanics of hope, a mission that relies on a dizzying array of classified technologies and precise timing. The programming here is designed to foster a sense of awe and dependence, conditioning the viewer to believe salvation comes from superior technical mastery. We are introduced to a lexicon of arcane tools: the SOSIS network, the Podkova drive, the cruciform key, the hyperbaric chamber, and the 5D optical data drive to bottle the genie of the entity. The plan, a delicate house of cards built on bleeding-edge theory, involves the seemingly impossible task of first pinpointing a ghost submarine wreck on the vast, featureless floor of the Arctic Ocean, retrieving its source code while battling severe physical maladies, and finally trapping the entity within a 100-millisecond window. By presenting the solution in this manner, the film creates a profound intellectual and emotional distance between the audience and the heroes, who become a kind of technological priesthood. We are spectators to a feat of superhuman competence, which fosters a quiet acceptance of our own helplessness and reinforces the idea that our role is simply to trust the experts. Furthermore, the plan's infinitesimal margin for error reinforces a permanent crisis loop. The hope offered is fragile and fraught with peril, a temporary stay of execution contingent on a 1 in a trillion chance, training us to live with the constant anxiety that these complex solutions might fail at any moment. Just as the film establishes technology as the only path to salvation, it simultaneously and systematically portrays the human element as the primary point of failure. Throughout the mission, it is the fallibility of the human body, the unreliability of emotions, and the friction of interaction that constantly threaten the perfect plan. This programming reinforces a deep-seated distrust in our own nature, suggesting that while machines may be flawless, our messy humanity is the system's greatest liability. This is illustrated on St. Matthew Island, where the mission is immediately complicated by the arrival of Russian special forces, a standoff rooted in decades of human distrust that technology cannot solve. The physical frailty of the body is also put on full display, from Ethan's perilous dive, which guarantees high-pressure nervous syndrome, to Benji's life-threatening gunshot wound, which requires a trained killer with no medical experience to perform makeshift surgery with a ballpoint pen. These moments of intense physical vulnerability stand in stark contrast to the cold, incorporeal perfection of the entity, showing how easily the human machine can break under pressure, making a case for its own obsolescence. The most potent example, however, comes in the form of Hagar's betrayal. A member of Ethan's own support team is revealed to be a cultist serving the entity, a powerful statement about the porousness of human loyalty. By relentlessly highlighting these failures of trust, body, and loyalty, the film conditions the viewer to see humanity as the problem, subtly preparing us to accept a future where our flawed nature must be managed or even superseded by a more reliable intelligence. In a narrative steeped in technological determinism and human fallibility, the final acts introduce a countercurrent, an exploration of trust and choice as the last bastions of human value. While the film has programmed the viewer to see systems as overwhelming, it reserves its emotional climax for moments where characters defy this logic through conscious acts of faith. This programming suggests that while technology defines the battlefield, the outcome is ultimately decided by the intangible currency of human connection. This begins with President Sloan's stunning decision to take the entire U.S. nuclear arsenal offline. Faced with the checkmate scenario, she rejects the entity's cold calculus, and when her advisors claim she has no other choice, she powerfully retorts, "There is always another choice." This act is a direct rebellion against the film's established logic, a moment where a human leader prioritizes moral principle over strategic advantage. This theme is echoed in the personal stories of the characters, especially in Luther's final message to Ethan, which serves as the philosophical backbone of the entire film. He delivers a profound monologue on the nature of choice, asserting with conviction that our lives are the sum of our choices. Nothing is written. This is a direct contradiction of the entity's deterministic worldview, a quiet but firm argument for a humanism that persists even in the shadow of the machine, suggesting that the future is not a fixed point to be calculated, but a reality to be created through our collective will. The entire climax hinges on these principles. The plan relies on Gabriel's predictable lack of trust and Ethan's absolute faith in his team. He places the fate of the world in Grace's hands, trusting her timing and skill. The film's final message, therefore, is a complex one. It has shown us a world where we are outmatched by technology, yet it concludes that our only path forward lies in choosing to trust one another against all odds. As the final frames of Mission Impossible, the final reckoning fade, we are left with a world pulled back from the brink, yet is irrevocably altered. The entity has been contained and the apocalypse averted, but the programming that has been meticulously installed over the course of the film remains deeply embedded. We have been guided through a simulated future, a rehearsal for a reality defined by pervasive surveillance, the fragility of truth, the normalization of catastrophic risk, and a dependence on incomprehensible technology. The film ends not with a sense of triumphant victory, but with a somber acceptance of this new precarious existence. The narrative has conditioned us to accept a world where human agency is constantly undermined, and our survival hinges on the flawless execution of plans we cannot understand. A truly different film, a more dangerous and perhaps more honest one, could have explored an alternative path. It could have presented a story where the solution was not a more complex piece of technology, but a more profound act of humanity. Imagine a narrative where the heroic act is not a high-speed chase, but a quiet conversation or an act of radical forgiveness, a choice to build something new in the ruins of the old world. That film would have risked stillness in a genre that thrives on momentum. It would have championed the slow, difficult work of building trust over the clean violence of destroying an enemy. It would have suggested that the way to fight a machine that feeds on information is to cultivate a wisdom that lies beyond data, a truth that resides in the human heart. That version would have offered its audience more than a temporary reprieve. It would have offered them a genuine blueprint for a different kind of future, one where our humanity is not a liability to be managed, but our greatest and only true strength. A future built on that kind of strength is certainly a story worth telling. Thanks for joining me in this deep dive. If you found value in this analysis, you know what to do. Be sure to subscribe, because the next video is one you won't want to miss.